Okay, so your GMO greetings. Yet I say we thank you everyone for joining in once again. This is part 2 of the Hoodoo Sexuality live that we did a couple of days ago. We wanted to expand upon what we started with and then give some more detailed information cosmologically as well as ritually. We did focus on cosmology in the first portion. We want to focus more so on cosmology as it relates to ritual in this section. So move this around right quick. Okay, so the very first thing we want to check out okay, and once again, for those who are unaware, I am Odwirafo Kwesi Rane Bata Akan, Odwirafo of Akwamu Amaruka Itivimu, the Akwamu Nation in North America within Ojiraman, the purified nation, Afro-Akani people, African Black people in the Western Hemisphere. So we have upcoming this weekend, this Saturday, which is MAYN, as we call it in the Akan language. We have our 8th annual, HOODOO MAYN, HOODOO Nation Festival. So let's just show that real quick. And this is our HOODOO MAYN site, the HOODOO MAYN, HOODOO Nation Festival. And you will see all the different the things that we've posted and, you know, registration and so forth. 2 of the videos we've done so far, the lives we've done so far, and the entire flyer with all of the details and so forth. So you'll see here our 3 HOODOO MAYN, HOODOO Nation Festival journals that we published in the first 3 years, plus our book, the seminal work, Hoodoo People, that we talked about in the previous live, and we're going to get into tonight as well. So you can download those 4 books for free, detailed information about the Hoodoo tradition. And you can also, you know, you'll see all of the detailed information. So this is our 8th annual festival. When we started, you know, over 7 years ago, deciding to have or being directed by the Nananum Nsamanfo, our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, to host a Hoodoo festival, we looked around to see what was already in existence. The only thing that we saw that was an annual festival was a fraudulent, garbage, pseudo Hoodoo festival put on by the whites and their offspring, you know, on the West Coast and so forth. Of course, it's totally fraud. Non-Black people cannot practice the Hoodoo tradition or any Afro-Akani tradition, any African Black tradition in any fashion. So anybody claiming to practice Hoodoo or Juju or Vodou or any ancestral religious tradition that's non-Black, whether they're talking about the Orisha or the Loa, the Vodou, the Abosom, the Arusi, the Ntoru, the deities, Kemetic tradition and so forth, 100% fraud. No deities have ever or will ever communicate with the spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring. So we saw that these criminals were putting forth this fake Hoodoo festival. So of course, that was just, you know, part of what we had to look into to see if somebody was actually doing something. But our people wanted us, our Nsamanfo, our ancestral spirits wanted us to reestablish the HOODOO MAYN, HOODOO Nation Festival for our people, of course, to acknowledge the Akan identity of the Hoodoo tradition and give real information about the Hoodoo tradition so people can incorporate, those who are of this tradition can incorporate the fullness of the tradition in their lives. And of course, as we are Afro-Akani people, when we put forward authentic expressions of our culture, then any other Afro-Akani group, African Black group or individual can learn from that and get insight into their own culture by seeing what we're doing. If someone puts out an authentic expression of the voodoo tradition as preserved in the blood circles of Black people in North America for the past 300 plus years and so forth, like our sister Voodoo Queen Kalinda LeBeau and so forth in New Orleans, when she puts out that authentic expression of voodoo as it's been preserved here in North America that has nothing to do with Haiti, but has been in North America for hundreds of years, directly from the continent and so forth, then when she puts out that authentic expression, then we can learn from that as well. That informs us as well. That informs our own tradition. When we put out an authentic expression of Akan Ancestral Religion in North America, which is the Hoodoo tradition, then that informs other Afro-Akaini people, even if they're part of different groups, they can still be informed and empowered and have greater understanding of their own tradition. So this is our 8th annual. And when we first started, at the very first festival, there weren't a number of Hoodoo festivals put forward by Black people in North America. We didn't see any that were, prominent. We didn't see any at all. If somebody was doing something that was, very local and so forth. But once we started doing our Hoodoo MAYN, Hoodoo Nation Festival, and when we talk about Hoodoo MAYN, the term MAYN in Akan means nation. Of course, nation, but also people. So the Hoodoo MAYN is the Hoodoo Nation. That's speaking specifically of the Akan Nation in North America. So when we established that terminology, it was given to us by our Nananom Nsaman, for our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. That's why it's Hoodoo MAYN, the Hoodoo Nation. But after we began to have this yearly festival and became more popular, when we began to publish on the Hoodoo tradition, proving it's the Akan tradition, once we began to put, we were doing a lot of blog talk radio a few years back. We had a number of shows 4 times a week. We had different broadcasts 4 times a week. When we were putting out a number of different, broadcasts on the Hoodoo tradition, we published our Hoodoo MAYN Hoodoo Nation Journal, gave away a free copy of that journal to everyone who attended the Hoodoo MAYN Festival. Festival was free. They got a free book and so forth. We published our Hoodoo People book. In addition to the broadcast, then the information began to, expand and become viral and go across the internet, and different people around the country and our Black people around the world began to understand what this tradition is about. But then you began to see a lot of people all of a sudden within the past few years coming up with Hoodoo festivals, Hoodoo fests, trying to cash in on this, this Hoodoo tradition and so forth, putting forward misinformation, false information about the tradition, very often weaving in the Ifa or Orisha tradition or the Vodou tradition and the Congo tradition and so forth, because they never knew that the Akan tradition is the source of the Hoodoo tradition. So since they didn't know that, they assumed that it may have come from other sources, and they just cobbled together different practices and philosophies from different sources, and then put that forward as a Hoodoo tradition, and then began to try to monetize misinformation. And that's going on now. So you see a lot more people. If you look back when we first started in 13,016, which was October of 13,016 in the Gregorian calendar, that's October of 2015 when we had our first festival. And prior to that, when we were publishing on the tradition years before that and so forth, you'll see that there weren't very many people talking about the Hoodoo tradition like that. But then when you look at Instagram and over the past few years and so forth, you see a proliferation of pages of people calling themselves Hoodoo people and conjure people and two-headed conjures and selling, little packets and crystals and making up all kinds of things. But we need to put forward accurate information, reclaiming the actual Akan tradition from which it is. So we're going to pick up where we left off in the first segment of this live a couple of days ago. Okay, so let's go out of this. So we're talking about hoodoo sexuality, because of course, not only the whites and their offspring always seek to insert their perversity, so they seek to insert dissexuality, homosexuality into anything that they touch. They seek to control and touch and invade the hoodoo tradition, which they cannot, of course, because they're racially incapable of that. So it's always fraud. But then you have individuals in our community, the Black community, who follow along with the whites in Narrow Spring, and they seek to impute the perversity of sexual deviance into our culture. That includes the perversity of dissexuality, homosexuality, as well as interracialism, which has no footing or basis in the hoodoo tradition or any Afro-Akani culture at all. That's sexual deviance as well. So we went into some detail. We started talking about the nature of the Afro-Akani man, Afro-Akani woman, the balance of male and female. We talked about Amen and Amenet, the great father and great mother and so forth. Inyame, Inyamewa, the great mother and great father, supreme being, who are two halves of a divine whole. We talked about the creator and creatress, Inyokumpon and Inyokunton, Ra and Ra'ed and so forth. We talked about also, let's just pull this up real quick, the male and female force of divine law and balance, which is Ma'at on the feminine side and Ma'a, the male divinity, on the masculine side. She is called Amma Ria, and he is called Amma Su. In the Akan tradition, Ma Ria and Ma Su is Ma'at and Ma'a in ancient Kemet and so forth, and Kanit, the male and female forces of divine law and balance in creation. So we talked about that. We went into some detail about that, and we were also talking about the nature of Kanche and conjure in the beginning. So that's a direct link between Kanche, conjure, ritual, and sexuality. So we want to touch on the Kanche aspect, how that leads to ritual, and then the balance of male and female in the second segment. So, but first we want to look at some terms. So we have Akan cosmological terms preserved in Hoodoo. In the first segment, we went into detail about Undu, the Akan term Undu, meaning medicine from roots, trees, and plant life. The Undu is the medicine. It comes from the Undua, which is the plant life, trees, plants, and so forth. And then Undu, and of course, the term Undu in Akan, specifically the Akwamu Akan dialect, became pronounced Undu, became Udu and Hoodoo in North America. But Undu also means to become heavy, heaviness, to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication. And then Undu also means to feel a presentiment or a foreboding, meaning you can see into the spirit realm and see what things are unfolding. So that has to do with divination and so forth. So Undu meaning medicine from roots, trees, and plant life, that's root work and so forth. Undu meaning to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication. Undu to feel a presentiment or foreboding, or to see into the spirit realm and communicate with the spirits and so forth. We showed how Undu came to be pronounced Hoodoo. That is the Hoodoo tradition. And we spent the first part of the last live talking about Kanche and showing the etymological origin of the term Kanche, Ka, meaning to speak, utter, say, or tell. Ache, meaning to come forward, as in the coming forward of the sun. Kanche, meaning to utter incantations. Ka, to make the spirits of the deities and ancestral spirits come forward. Anche, so we showed that Kanche, to utter incantations to make the spirits come forward as a ritual practice. This Akan term is the origin of the term Kanche, as in Kanje man and Kanje woman. When we said we're a Kanje man and Kanje woman, when we were forced into North America, that was our Akan people saying, not only am I a ritual practitioner and so forth, but they were identifying themselves as Akan men and Akan women, identifying their ethnic group through their language. So the Kanje man and the Kanje woman came to be known as the Kanje man and Kanje woman. Europeans attempted to put forth the false notion that we were mispronouncing the word conjure by saying Kanche. We showed that Kanche comes from the Akan language, two words, Ka and Ache. And then we showed the same two words with the same meanings, Ka, to speak, utter, say, and tell, and Ache, to come forward, as in the coming forward of the sun, in the language of ancient Kemet, in the Medusa hieroglyphs, proving that there's a direct line from ancient Khanate Kemet, Ka and Che, to West Africa amongst the Akan people, Ka and Che, into North America, Kanche. So we talked about that last week, or in the last, broadcast. Now, if you look at the term haint, spirit and haint blue and so forth, utilizing the Hoodoo tradition, that comes from the Akan term hinti. And hinti means a spirit that's aroused and powerful and conjured up and so forth. And that's the origin of the term haint, being associated with the kinds of spirits that are wild, but not just wild, but powerful and aroused and explosive and so forth. That is the terminology that comes directly from the Akan tradition, not only in North America, but the Akan in South America, who practice the Winti tradition in Suriname and so forth. The term Winti comes from Quinti, HW Quinti. That's a variation of Hinti, and they call their spirits, they use the term Quinti, which has to do with the spirits that are aroused and conjured and so forth to communicate with the people. Both Akan people in North America, Hinti, Akan people in South America, Quinti. We're using the same terminology to describe the nature of the function of these spirits, and that Hinti came to be haint in English. Some people thought we were saying saint or haunt because they don't know the tradition. But the same word in Akan that describes the nature of that spirit, that has the same definition in Hoodoo in North America. The Komfwa, which is the priest or priestess who becomes possessed. The term Kom means possession. Komfwa is the group of people, Fwa, who are possessed. Kom, spirit possession, spirit communication. That's a class of priestesshood. The Komfwa came to be known as the Gofwa and Gofa doctor with the Gofa dust and so forth. And the Komfwa in Akan tradition, they put the powder on their bodies to show that they're possessed and communicating with the spirits and so forth, whether it's the white Shirel power or the black or gold or red and so forth. We have entire cosmology associated with that. This is where you get the Gofa doctor with the Gofa dust and so forth in the tradition. Let's switch over real quick. And we're going to look at our Odwirafo page. And one of the articles that we published on that page is the, hold on a second, article dealing with quote unquote, High John the Conqueror. Okay, and so we show people talking about the Hoodoo tradition are unaware of who, quote unquote, High John the Conqueror was, pronounced in certain dialects, Johnny Kakaru and so forth, who that individual was. Some will say that he was a myth, and some will say he came from the Congo and all this other stuff. They don't know who he was. We know who Jama Kakaru is, the king or Asafo Hinni, which is the warrior Asafo Ohinni, king of the Akwamu nation. He was the lieutenant to the Akwamu Hinni, the Akwamu king. He was captured along with his entourage and so forth and sent into the Western Hemisphere, into the West Indies. They were captured. They were sent to St. John's Island. And when you read about the revolt on St. John's Island in 1733 by the Akwamu Akan people, led by King Jama or Asafo Hinni Jama and so forth, they took over the entire island for 6 months. They waged war. He was a military lieutenant and so forth, took over the island for 6 months until the rebellion was eventually put down. But instead of being captured, they did a suicide pact and so forth. They were not going to allow themselves to be captured. His spirit went into the Jama plant, and that root in the Western Hemisphere is the root called kakaru, and that kakaru in the Akwamu dialect, kakaruru in the Asante dialect, but it's kakaru in the Akwamu dialect. That is the root that's called ginger. But in our dialect, it's kakaru. Kaka means to bite, to chew. It also means to rub or to touch. And undu or unduru means medicine. So the kakaru is the chewing medicine, also the rubbing medicine, the chewing root and the rubbing root. It also means fierce and irrepressible and powerful. So Jama Kakaru came to be known amongst the Danes when they enslaved the people. Instead of calling him Jama, or they will say that the natives called him King Jama. The Danes called him Konge Joni. Konge in their dialect means king, and Joni was a corruption of Jama, but in their own records, they said the natives called him King Jama, His Highness Jama, because he was an Ohini, a Akan term for king, but a warrior king, a Safo-Hini. They would call him Ohini, which means king. If they translated Ohini into the English language or the Danish language, it would be Konge. But instead of calling him Jama, the Danes called him King Joni or Konge Joni. And in English, they would translate that as King John or King June and so forth, His Highness June or John and so forth. But he was the one whose spirit went into the sacred plant and so forth and said that if you ever need to contact my spirit, do it through that sacred animal or plant totem, the Edria, the Achini Edria, or the plant totem and so forth. That's the Kakaru. So Jani Kakaru is really Jama or Nyama Kakaru, the rubbing root, chewing root, powerful plant and so forth that came from that Ohini, that king, His Highness Jama, which they corrupted to John. Jani Kakaru became, or Jama Kakaru became Jani Kakaru, or John the Conqueror root, and so forth. So we lay that out in this particular article. We did a broadcast on that, and then we showed these other terms as well. So we go into detail in that article and the related broadcast. Now, and then just a couple of other terms. We have the term jo, which means to shout. And in the Akom tradition, when we're talking about spirit possession, when sacred drummers begin to play and so forth, and Akan people begin to dance, it is characteristic within an Akom celebration ritual, just like Yoruba people have a bembe. In the Akan tradition, we have Akom. Akom means spirit possession, but the spirit possession dance is called Akom. So what you'll see is a certain group of Ocherema drummers on the side in their own section. They're drumming, and then you will see the Okomfo, male or female. They get possessed. They put the powder on their bodies to show that they're possessed. And as a matter of fact, let me show this. We can show this in one of our books. We'll show this in our Kemet Hina Intoro book. Just want you to see an image of the priest possessed. Okay, so in our book, Kemet Hina Ntoro, The Black Nation and Divinity, where we're talking about the term Kemet, as well as the term Ntoro, or quote unquote netter, but Ntoro and so forth. Both of those terms exist in the Akan language by the same names, but also the same definitions, because we carry on the same tradition. Just give me a second, just taking a minute to load up. But as it's loading up, so what you'll see is the priests with the powder on the body and so forth, showing that they're in communication with the spirit realm. And they dance in a counterclockwise circle with a specific dance movement. And you'll see one of the dances is the Adowa dance. That's the dance of the Adowa which is the antelope. So you'll see them moving and then they'll jump up in the air and move a little bit more and jump up in the air and so forth. That is the antelope, the way the antelope moves and then hops up, then moves and hops up. When you hear about the buck jump in New Orleans and so forth, the buck is the antelope and the jump is the leap. That dance is called the Adowa dance, traditional dance in Akan tradition and so forth. It's literally imitating the animal totem of the antelope. So, but you see them dance in a counterclockwise circle. They have certain foot movement, and when you see that, and then you look at the ring shout that you find in North America and so forth, dancing in a counterclockwise circle with certain foot movements and so forth, you'll see it's the same, literally the same counterclockwise movement. And there's ritual jo in the Akan tradition. Jo means to shout or lament. When you're dealing with spirit possession and communicating with spirits and so forth, that's what we're talking about. And we just want to pull up that particular image right quick. So here you see an Abosumfo, one of the classes of Akan priests and priestesses in the Akan culture, derived from ancient Kanini Kemet, but in Akan culture, the Abosumfo is a high-level priest or priestess. Then you have Akomfo, the junior priest or priestess, but it's different levels, similar to Babalaos and Iyanifas in the Yoruba tradition, and then Olorishas and so forth. You have Abosumfo in the Akan tradition, and then you have Akomfo as well. But you see the Abosumfo is in possession. The powder or the dust on the body indicates they're communicating with the divinity. So when we talk about the Okomfo, or Komfoa, in the Akwamu dialect is Okomfo, in the Asante dialect is Komfoa, and that Komfoa came to be Gofua and Gofa doctor and Gofa dust, and they wear the Gofa dust, the Komfo dust and so forth, and that's the Komfo doctor or the Komfo priest with the Komfo dust, the Gofa dust and so forth. This is what you'll see. But when these sacred drums are playing, you will see the people dancing in a counterclockwise circle using the same footwork. So you see a video from Ghana, you see the people dancing and moving around the circle in a specific pattern and so forth, counterclockwise. And then you look at a ring shout ceremony in South Carolina and so forth, you will see them dancing in the same counterclockwise circle. They're engaged in the jo or the show or the shout and so forth. And they're engaged in spirit possession, spirit communication. So now we also have the terms mogya in Akan, which becomes mojo in English. And we have ja in Akan, which becomes jack in English. Now, we're going to pull up that the book that we touched on in the first live. Let me just pull that up right quick. Because this is what we want to focus on tonight. And of course, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat room. And we're going to get to all of them. Okay, so. Now, this is the Mojo working book We showed that last time, Mojo Working, the Old African American Hoodoo System, written by Dr. Katrina Hazard, which is a good book. Dr. Hazard actually traveled to DC to come to our first annual Hoodoo MAYN Hoodoo Nation Festival. So she's talking about chewing the root and kanje, which is conjure and so forth. And this is the glossary in the back. So this is gopher dust, the term haint and so forth, which we just talked about. Now, and these different terms we're talking about, we're going to go into detail about them at the Hoodoo MAYN Hoodoo Nation Festival this Memenida this Saturday in Atlanta. So if you would like to attend, go to our website. You can register on the website, get your tickets on the website, and then of course you can join us there. So some of these things we just wanted to touch on tonight, but we want to focus on a couple of others. So we see mojo, a traditional African-American amulet, a genuine mojo or mojo bag. And let me scroll up. And then you also see the term jack, another name for a type of hoodoo amulet or mojo bag. And jack ball, as we mentioned before, the divination device, but it's also a term used to designate a type of amulet carried for protection and luck, as in I got my jack ball with me tonight. So we have the mojo and the jack, sometimes called a jack ball, but the mojo and the jack, hoodoo tradition. So we already have these different terms. All of these different terms we're talking about: hoodoo, undu, kanche, conjure, hinti, haint, komfwa, gofwa, or gofa, jamakakaru, Johnny Conqueror, Joe, shout, or shout, and so forth. And then the popular terms mogya and ja, which became mojo, and jack or jack. All of these terms are Akan terms. All of these terms have cosmological meanings tied to specific deities, ancestral spirits, and ritual practices. All of them are related to one another, whether it's undu, dealing with spirit possession and, becoming heavy with the spirit and feeling presentiment or foreboding. That has to do with kanche or conjure, ritual invocation, and so forth. And then the kinds of spirits that manifest that are aroused and fired up, the haint spirits, the hinti spirits, and so forth, that is affected by the komfwa or komfa or gofa doctor, with the gofa dust through spirit possession, jamakakaru, the sacred root, and so forth, shouting that happens at the Akan ritual. All of these things are intertwined. Their definitions are intertwined. All of them are linguistically Akan, culturally Akan, cosmologically Akan, ritually Akan. You can't talk about any one of these terms. When people look at these terms in English, hoodoo, conjure, haint, gufa, Johnny Conqueror, shout, mojo, jack, they would think these are just English terms. If they knew that each one of them are Akan terms and could be fully defined only in Akan Ancestral Religion, linguistically, the same sounds, but also, ritually, then they would understand what this culture is. People who are not teaching this are not teaching it because they're unaware. Those who are unaware and find out about it, they incorporate it. Those who are misinformed, but also unscrupulous, will put forward false notions about, what hoodoo is. And when they find out about this information, they get exposed for being fraudulent, and they try to hide or suppress this information or pretend like it doesn't exist because it exposed the fact that what they've been teaching and what they've been charging people for, pretending like it's hoodoo, has been fraudulent the entire time. Now, so we want to get into today what the mojo and the jack, or the moja and the ja, is. And that ties directly into the matriclan, the patriclan, masculine energy, feminine energy, the balance of male and female, hoodoo sexuality, and so forth. But before we get to that, we want to go down to one particular piece that's important. We did a broadcast on this a few years back, second. Let me get out of that. Okay, so what you see here, when the Romans invaded ancient Kemet, and by the time you get to the 1st century, so-called AD, there was a cult created, this false deity that they were calling Osiris Antinous. And of course, the real divinity is Osar. In Greek, is corrupted into Osiris or Osiris and so forth. But they put forth this false deity, Osiris Antinous, and created a cult for this divinity. What is the origin of that? You look around 130, so-called AD. What happened was the emperor, the Roman emperor who was in control at the time, his name was Hadrian. And Hadrian, of course, like the various Roman emperors in Greek and so forth, Hadrian was a faggot, a dissexual, a homosexual, and so forth. And Antinous was his faggot counterpart, or faggot, quote unquote, lover. And Antinous fell into the river during a celebration of Osar, which corrupted into Osiris and so forth, fell into the river, the Hapi River, and died. And because Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian, was so distraught that his faggot, counterpart was deceased, this is what took place. The priesthood, which is the pseudo priesthood that was serving the Roman emperors, immediately, quote unquote, deified Antinous. His body was mummified. The Tekenu, so-called obelisks, but Tekenu were erected. Antinopolis, a city named after this faggot, was created. And then Hadrian declared a formal cult dedicated to Antinous, which spread throughout the empire. So you have statues that are unearthed all the time of this fake Osiris Antinous, character and so forth. And they had a formal cult established for this faggot. So now they elevated the faggot to the level of a false deity. So there are statues all over the country. There are temples to Osiris Antinous, the fake deity. People are going to the temples and giving offerings and praying to this fake deity to assist them in different aspects of their lives and so forth. This is one of the first instances where Europeans, our enemies, would invaded ancient Kemet, ancient Afrikai, sought to officially and formally declare and elevate this sexuality, homosexuality, that insane practice, sexual deviance, perversion, to the level of deity. And then you have Negroes today who are seeking to do the same thing, trying to introduce dissexuality, homosexuality into the hoodoo tradition as though it's founded and it's real. And it's not. Osar, of course, and any other divinity does not support or embrace perversity, dissexuality. They hate dissexuality, repel that. That's always been true and always will be true. So anytime you see that trying to enter our traditions, it's always fraud. Ma'an, Ma'at, male-female forces of divine law and balance. You will never see the divinity Ma'a, that force in creation, if you're actually invoking this divinity and communicating directly with him, this Abosom, this Orisha, this Vodou, this divinity, this Ntoro, he will never participate in assisting a male screwing another male. He's not going to participate in that. He's not going to support that. He's withdrawn from that perversity. Ma'at is never going to participate or support a woman trying to lay down with another woman. That's never going to happen. The male and female forces of divine law and balance do not support that disorder. So now let's get back to So now, let's switch back over to our other document. Now, when we did that broadcast, it was important to put that out because that's the first true historical incident of Europeans invading Africa and trying to force this sexuality, homosexuality, not only into the culture, but trying to elevate that spiritual perversity to the level of divine, which is insane. So it didn't just happen with, over the past few hundred years, or like they're trying to, force transgenderism and dissexuality today. That's been going on since 2000 years. Now, we have the terms mogya in Akan and eja, the extended term eja padie and so forth. So mojo and jack is the mogya, and eja or ja and so forth. So eja, the root is ja. So when we look at ja, it's jack, mogya, mojo, and so forth. Now let's give some detailed information. So people are familiar with the mojo bag and so forth, typically a red flannel bag, and it's a, talismanic and so forth. And then people who know about hoodoo know about the jack or jack ball. The jack comes from the ja, and the jack ball is from the ja padie, and ja padie became ja balie and jack ball and jack ball and so forth. Now, this is a talisman in the hoodoo tradition because it's a talisman in the Akan tradition. Both of them are talismans in the Akan tradition. Let's look at the jack ball first. If you look at this, this is an image, and here's a more clear image further down. This is a more clear image, but that's an example from the Ivory Coast. The Akan people in Ivory Coast, they call it the ja. In Akan people in Ghana call it eja padie or eja. In Ivory Coast, they just say ja, and they'll spell it DJA, but either way it's ja and so forth. You'll see the packet here, and there's another version of it with, it's covered by a cowrie shell. So it's a white packet that has specific implements in it. On the mundane side, when you see the Akan gold weights, and let's show you an image of the Akan gold weights for example. Okay, so you see these Akan gold weights and what they are. They are brass figures. We use gold dust, sika, or gold dust as currency. So instead of using paper money, we'll use gold dust, but the gold dust had to be weighed. So for example, in English, you got 1 gram or 2 grams or 3 grams or 4 grams. If you want to purchase something, would it be 1 gram of gold dust or 2 grams of gold dust or 5 grams of gold dust or 10 grams of gold dust and so forth? In order to know how much, the gold dust weighed, you'd have to have a weight. You have a 1 gram weight, the 2 gram weight, the 3 gram weight, a 4 gram weight. You put that in one side of the scale, and then you put some gold dust on the other side. And then once it balances out, if you have a 1 gram weight, you put enough gold dust to balance it out, and you say, okay, this is 1 gram of gold dust. You put it in a little bag and you give it to the person. So, but instead of just having little square or circular weights of 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, we started to make the weights in the form of our sacred symbols. And the Adinkra symbols in the Akan tradition, you'll find them in the gold weights as well. So each one of the weights represented a different symbol. They span all aspects of creation, and they had proverbs associated with them and wisdom associated with them. So when you had a little package that had all of your gold weights in them, their plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, human life, and they're representative of every aspect of creation, ancestral spirits, divinities, and so forth, the proverbs associated with the symbols. embody the entire knowledge of the universe. So when you have this collection of Abramu, or so-called gold weights, these brass figures and so forth, the entire collection is like an encyclopedia. And a common person can look at this, and there are many gold weights and so forth, but this is just a sample of them. They can look at this, grouping of gold weights. They can pick up each one, tell you the name of it, the proverb associated with it, what aspect of creation it governs. It's like an encyclopedia. Just like somebody in the past used to have a set of encyclopedias that's full of knowledge, these weights with their symbols and proverbs encompass the knowledge of the entire universe for Akan people. So they will be collected together and held in a pack. And that Eja Padie, on the mundane level, that's the pouch that holds the gold weights, and that is the inheritance that's passed on from father to son. The father would give the son at a certain age his pack of gold weights. All the knowledge and wisdom of the entire clan that represents the knowledge of the universe is incorporated within those gold weights and so forth. So not only do they use them to weigh gold dust and so forth to purchase things, but they also are used for divinatory purposes. These are divinatory instruments. Now, so there's a mundane practice associated with them, but also a spiritual. And this is why it says, and this is from the Gold Weights book, that these pictures shows two Ja. And in Ivory Coast, they spell it DJ-A, Ja. In Ghana, they'll spell it G-Y-A, Ja. But it says these pictures shows two Ja. The black spot on the one on the left, the black spot right here, is from sacrificial animals' blood. This packet symbolizes religion, ancestor worship, and the sum of human knowledge. The Ja on the right has a cowrie, meaning cowrie shell, quote unquote old coin, symbolizing the economic power of the reigning sovereign. So this one has the, cowrie shell on it. Cowrie shells were used for, money as well. So cowrie shells or the gold dust and so forth. So, but the one here is dealing with ancestral communication and, sacrifices made, the blood of the animal is placed, on the packet and so forth. It's a magnet for the energy of the Nsamampo and Abosom, the ancestral spirits and deities. So this ritual packet has to do with, it's a talisman, talismanic, a sumain, a talisman, connecting the individual to the patriclan Abosom, the patriclan deity that governs the patriclan or patrilineage and so forth, the patriclan blood circle, and the spirits of the ancestresses and ancestors of the patriclan, the divinity that has governed the patriclan for thousands of years. The term Edja, father, male parent, progenitor, and so forth. Edja, Padie, heritage, inheritance. That's how they say it amongst the Akan in Ghana. So you don't only inherit, the gold weights and so forth, the sum of knowledge from your father, and he gives you the packet, but you also inherit the Abosom, the divinity, the patriclan Abosom. It's called the Edja Bosom, or the father's Edja deity. When you have a sperm cell and an ovum cell, and they unite to create the zygote and so forth, and then the spirit of the ancestors will take up residence. The energy that animated the sperm cell is the Abosom, the divinity that governs the patriclan ancestresses and ancestors. The energy, the spirit that animates the ovum cell is the female divinity that governs the matriclan ancestresses and ancestors. The Abosom, the deity that governs the patriclan ancestresses and ancestors, is called the Ntoro Bosom, or the Edja Bosom, the father's deity, the patriclan deity. So that's what that says. Now, just to give an example of so it says here, the Ntoro denotes both a god Ntoro bosom and Edja bosom. Sometimes they spell it with an E, typically in the Fanti dialect. Akwamu dialect, they'll spell it with an A, but Edja bosom is the same as the Ntoro bosom, the father's god, who is a river god. Nsio bosom, Nsio means river, intimately linked to water and male sperm, and a group of patrilineal descendants who are spiritually linked because of their Sun, which is the spirit, which is an individuation of the Ntoro, has been passed on to them by way of their father's semen. And then the socio-structural effects and status of the group are virtually nil. It is a spiritual, moral, and in a limited sense, cultic group. So they start editorializing about that. But the key is, as we said, when the sperm cell is swimming, that's a cell that has the father's DNA, which is the inheritance. That's the genetic inheritance that is given to you by your father. Just like we give you the, pack of Abramu or gold weights, that's the inheritance of the nation, and you weigh the gold dust. That has to do with economics and power and control and so forth, but it also has to do with the sum of human knowledge within those weights and so forth. But the spiritual force that animated the sperm cell is the Edja bosom, the father's deity, the Ntoro bosom, the patriclan deity, passes on that energy complex that you inherit. Just like you inherit DNA characteristics from your father, and there's certain phenotypical traits that you have that look like your father, and certain spiritual dispositions you have that reflect your father and so forth. There's also an energy complex, a divinity that we receive, and we communicate with that deity, the patriclan divinity. On the feminine side, you have the mogya, and just like you have the term Ghana, which, when it's spelled in English, Ghana. So if you hear someone say, I'm from Ghana, and if you ask them, you ask them where they're from, they say, I'm Akan and I'm from Ghana. Then a person from America would turn to their friend and say, he's Akan and he's from Ghana. The person said, I'm from Ghana, and we would say Ghana, because we're so used to in English, if a word ends in A, we pronounce it as because English is the only language we typically speak. So if someone says, I'm from Ghana, we say Ghana. If they say I'm Nana, like Nana, Kofi and so forth, we'll say, oh, this is Nana Kofi. We won't say Nana, we'll say Nana Kofi. We'll say Ghana, because we're so trained to speak like that. So when we brought this terminology of mogya, we ended up pronouncing it moja, and moja was written by white ethnologists when we would say it as mojo and so forth, and that's where the mojo comes from. It's a talisman as well. And we put this image in here because when we did a broadcast, we had the jack ball and so forth. When we look at the jacks, knuckle bones for divination, and you have the balls and so forth. Those knuckle bones represent, bones that we would cast for divination, and the ball is part of divination and so forth. So when someone's playing with jacks and they have the ball and the jacks and so forth, that's casting the bones for divination and picking up the stones. So you have the stones and the bones, that's the jack ball and so forth. So when little children back in the day would be playing with, jacks and the jack ball and so forth, they were using the movements of divination. A priest or priestess opening up their sacred packet, taking the bones of an animal out and the stones from earth and so forth, and casting the bones, casting the stone, and then scooping them up and casting again and so forth. That's what that jack ball game really is. So we put that there for that reason. But the mojo or the mogya, the reason why it's called mogya, first and foremost, is because the term mogya in Akan means blood. That's the term for blood, but specifically blood of the mother, the matriclan blood, the ovulatory blood, the blood that carries the ovum, not just blood in general, but the blood that carries the ovum. So when we identify who we are and what clan we come from, there are 7 major matriclans in Akan tradition: the Asona clan or Asona Abusia, the Agona clan, Agona Abusia, the term Abusia means matriclan and so forth, the Adriana, and Ekoana, and Asiniye and Brietuo and Asachiri and so forth, and then subgroups. But you have these 7 major matriclans. All Akan people come from one of those 7 clans. And those 7 clans are headed up by 7 great ancestresses. And those 7 great ancestresses are governed by 7 female divinities. And in fact, just to put an exclamation on that, let's go back to our book real quick. We were making this point in our book, the Kemet Hina and Toro book. We said there are 7 major Musia Kuo, meaning great Kuo Musia, great ancestral matriclans in Akan culture. Musia is plural for Abusia, which is a clan. Musia is clans and so forth. We said Asona, Agona, Adriana, Ekwana, Asinie, Retuo, Asachiri. These are the 7 major clans. They're governed by 7 women, 7 great ancestresses, and each one of those 7 have millions of descendants. And if you can't trace your blood circle to one of those 7 great mothers, then you're not Akan. So all Akan people are related via those 7 great ancestresses. But those 7 great ancestresses are governed by 7 female divinities. And in Akan culture, when you see the Pleiades star system, it's called Abrewa Nani Mba, the ancient mother or the old woman and her children. That's the shrine for those 7 female divinities. Now, we mentioned that here in our book, and then we show the relationship, because in ancient Kemet, on the patriclan side, on the father's side, there are 12 patriclan divinities, 12 male divinities, and each Akan person is connected to one of those 12. So your father was governed by, if you're Akan, governed by one of those 12 male divinities. That spiritual force animated his sperm cell. You received his DNA, but you also received the energy of that particular deity. On the feminine side, there's 7 great mothers. So these are the 12 male Ejaboson, Bosoma Fram, Pra, Opo, Sika, Akom, Gerebe, Ofin, Ayensu, Muru, Konsi, Chwe, and Krete. So we showed the relationship between the 7 female divinities and the 12 male divinities. When you look in the Runu Pert Imheru, the so-called Book of the Dead, you will see right before sunrise and so forth, in the 12 hours of the night and all of that, you see the 7 female divinities in the form of 7 sacred cows. They call it the 7 Het Heru. And then you'll see the 12 bearded divinities as well. These are the 7 female Aboson that govern the 7 matriclans in Akan culture, and the 12 bearded masculine Ejaboson in Akan culture. And there's another version of it where you see the 7 female divinities, the 7 Het Heru, in the form of 7 women, as you can see here. And then you also see the 12 male divinities pulling the boat of Afura in the underworld. This is the 12th hour of the night, right before sunrise and so forth, standing on the great serpent Ka and so forth. So that's what's happening. Okay, hold on a second. All right. So let's get back to the text. So you have the blood of the mother, we identify ourselves by the clan. So I'm from the Asona clan because my matriclan is Asona. And that has to do with my place in society, who I am, and so forth. We don't identify ourselves from the father's clan. We identify we're matrifocal, the matriclan. Just like in ancient Kemet, it is through the matriclan that the kingship and queenship is, established and so forth. In Akan culture, for example, only people from the Oyoko clan, the Oyoko Abusia or Oyoko clan in the Asante tradition, only people from that matric clan can be the Asante Hini or Asante Hima king or queen mother, Asante king or Asante queen mother. No other clan. When you look at the various clans in Akan culture, kingship, queenship, and offices in society are based on what matric clan you come from. Not what patric clan you come from, what matric clan you come from. And the reason for that is even though the male and female both contribute, sperm and ovum and so forth, once there's a, fusion and fertilization takes place, then the zygote doesn't implant itself in the body of the father. It implants itself in the body of the mother and develops as an embryo and is born out of the mother. So we identify with the matric clan. The term mogya means blood. The blood of the matric clan linked to the matric clan deity, the female divinity. We said the matric clan is called Abusia, family, kindred, relatives, and so forth. The term mogya, we said, means blood. It's also spelled boja, depending on the dialect and so forth, but mogya means blood. A person, also meaning a person related by blood, a kinsman, kinswoman. So just like we say, this is my blood. So the word blood, mogya, is blood. And they also have the terms okafo and danse and so forth, but mogya means blood. But blood also means, this is my blood, this is my relative. This is my kinsman, kinswoman. This is my blood, but you're talking about the matric clan relative. Now, the reason why that's important, the mogya, meaning blood, is also the word for a talisman. It's a blood talisman. Just like the eja or the jack is a talisman as well. So both of them are talismans. The Akan term for talisman is su-MAYN, charm, amulet, talisman, worn as a remedy or preservative against evils and mischief and such things, or such as diseases or witchcraft, all of that, but they're talismans. When you have a talisman, you can ritually impregnate that talisman with the energy of an ancestral spirit, of an abosom. You can wear it, it can repel negative energy, draw certain things to you and so forth. It is a miniature shrine, a shrine in miniature, and Conqueror, a shrine in miniature for an ancestral spirit or a divinity. If you have a real connection with the Nsamafo and abosom, you can ask them to impregnate their energy through that talisman. It will radiate that energy and work just like you can, charge up a battery and so forth. You can impregnate it with energy and so forth, and then plug that battery into a device and it will power the device. We can take our talismans and place them on the shrine and so forth, power them up. Once we wear them or carry them and so forth, we can do what we need to do with them. So the term su-MAYN is a term for talisman. This jack, patric clan talisman is a patric clan su-MAYN. The ja is a patric clan su-MAYN. The mogya or the mojo is a matric clan su-MAYN or a matric clan talisman, very often in the form of a red flannel bag. Now, the term MAYN means, it can mean structure, but it also means, it can mean nation, but it also means structure. And su means essence, essential nature. But a su is also the word for water. So you have nsu or nsio, water. But it's also, or other kind of liquid secretion from animal bodies. So milk is the nufu su, is the fluid that comes from the breast. Blood is a fluid and so forth. It's a form of su. Then you have the seminal fluid. It's su, is the fluid coming from the father and so forth. So su has to do with fluid, and it can come from different parts of the body. So su-MAYN is the structure, that entity, the structured form mind that has su, an essential nature that's also wrapped up into this nature of sacred fluid and so forth. The reason why that's important is because the term Obra in Akan, it means life, but it also is a term used for the nature or the menses of the woman. We also call it Setchima and so forth, but the Obra means life, but then Obra also means the menses, and the Obra Su is the fluid Su of the Obra, the menses, which is the menstrual blood, which is different from regular blood. It's the ovulatory blood. It carries that spiritual energy and so forth. The Obra Su is the menstrual moja, or the menstrual blood. And that menstrual blood goes into the structure of the mind, the Su mind, or the fluid mind, the fluid talisman that carries the fluid or the essential nature of the spirit inside that little structure. The blood itself is Obra Su. The blood itself becomes a talisman. This is why the moja meaning blood, not just blood in of itself, but it's tied to this notion of the blood is connected to a deity. The ovulatory blood is connected to the matriclan deity. So the Asona clan, Agona clan, and various other clans, they're all connected by the same blood circle, and that blood circle is animated by divinity. So when you have the blood of the Asona people, that blood itself is talismanic. That blood itself carries the energy of a specific female divinity. If you utilize that blood in ritual, you're invoking the female divinity of that particular clan. Now, when you understand that, and you look at, this is the reason why it's the color red very often. They say, I got a mojo bag. And even though later on they start using green mojo bags for money and all that other kind of stuff. But typically when you have a mojo bag, they're looking for a red bag. Why are they using a red black bag? Because mojo comes from the term mogya, which means blood, but specifically the talismanic blood connected to a female divinity, as well as all the matriclan, Nsamafo, or ancestresses and ancestors. Then the ejapadie is a white sack. Sometimes it's encased in brown leather, but then inside of it is the white cloth, and that white cloth is the one that carries the images, the gold weights and so forth. But it also, of course, when you talk about the sacrificial blood and so forth, it is, representative of communicating with the patriclan spirits, ancestral spirits and deities. Now, why is all of that important? Because biologically, the red flannel bag is literally the endometrium. The endometrium is the red bag inside of the womb of the woman. It is the lining of the uterus that is shed during menstruation. This is the endometrium, as you can see right here. This is the blood bag, the mojo, or the moja, the blood bag, and it's connected to the ovulatory blood that's connected to the matriclan divinity. That's why it's red. So every Black woman, of course, has a mojo bag inside of her body right now. It is the endometrium. You shed that bag every month, and then another, of course, is regenerated and so forth. But inside of the endometrium and the blood of the endometrium is your connection to your matriclan divinity, period, whether you're Akan or not. But we have specific names in the Akan tradition for, who these deities are. Everybody has their own names and their different traditions. But in the Akan tradition, we have the specific names in our culture for that. So every woman has a mojo or a moja bag, the endometrium. Then it's replicated ritually. And within that bag, you place the items that are empowered by the female divinity of that clan. So, and the ancestral spirits of that clan. That's why it's red. Now you look at the Ja, or Ejapadie, the patriclan, we said is a white cloth, bag with the, instruments inside, the inheritance inside, of course, and sometimes, encased by brown leather. Of course, the brown leather represents the scrotum of the male, the white cloth, and the inheritance inside of the white cloth bag and so forth. The white cloth represents the seminal fluid and so forth, and the inheritance inside, the sperm cells, as well as the, the DNA and so forth, the inheritance that's passed on. So when you have the ja, that's etja, that means father. The ja becomes jock, and in English, jack, that's the jack ball, literally. It's a ball of medicine, but the ball is, of course, the testes and so forth. So the reason why it's called ja in hoodoo in North America, that's not a okay, so it went out for a second. So if you can hear me, just let me know. Let me know in the chat room if it went out and came back in. Sometimes Zoom does that, it'll go out and go back in. So cut off for a second and came back on. So let me know in the chat room if you can see and hear clearly. Just want to make sure it didn't. Okay. Okay, so this is why when people speaking English, they're talking about the hoodoo tradition. They say, I have my mojo working. I have my jack ball with me tonight and so forth. The mojo and the jack is the mogya and the eja. If someone is talking about hoodoo and they're talking about a mojo, or they're talking about a jack or a jack ball, and they don't know that the mojo is the moja, the blood bag of the feminine and so forth, and it's connected to the matriclan abosom, abusi abosom, the matriclan deity, and they don't know that the jack is connected to the patriclan divinity, the Edja, the father, Ja abosom, the Ja bosom, the Ja divinity. If they don't know that it's matriclan and patriclan filiation with the mojo and the jack, because they don't know it's moja and Edja, then they don't know about hoodoo. We're the first to put this out with these details cosmologically about the hoodoo tradition, but this also has to do with ritual. Now let's look at a piece that we did. Second. All right. We put this article out a while back, a number of years ago. And it was a short series, basically. Sekhmet, Obrabosom, menstruation goddess. So many people know that Sekhmet spills blood through warfare, but she's also the divinity that governs menstruation. She spills blood through, warfare, but also spills blood through menstruation, that contracted process, that's a cleansing process, a recalibration process, and so forth. So we did a article on that, and we talked about that, and we talked about the Obra, the menses, and so forth. But this is very interesting thing about that. When we click over. So this is our article on Abena, female divinity. She's called Abena in Akan. She's called Sekhmet in ancient Kemet, but she's also called Sekhmet in Akan as well. Governs the planet Abena, which is so-called Mars and so forth on the feminine side. She's Abena in Akan. She's Iyami Abini in Yoruba, also called Idan in Yoruba. She's Nyokwe Ananu in the Ewe Vodun tradition and so forth. Now, we say that one of the variations of the name, Abena. You see Abena, Abenawa, Abenaba, Abraba, and so forth. Abraba is from the root Abra. Abra is a contraction of Abena, and Abena becomes Abena, and Abra, Abra, and so forth. So sometimes women born on Tuesdays, instead of saying Abena, they'll say Abra. That's a contraction of Abena, and so forth. So the variation Abraba is important for the root Bra, for the name of the divinity. Abena or Abra is also the root term for Obra, which means the menses, menstruation in Tree. Moreover, the other term in the Tree language for menstruation is Asechima. And let's look at that real quick, just so we can tie those ends together. And this is the Santi Fanti dictionary, the Tree dictionary. All right, now. And I just want you to see this word in the dictionary itself so you can make that correlation. Okay, so you can see the term here, Asechima, menstruation. Now, the reason why that's important, and we also showed that the term, in fact, let's just switch over so you can see it. So Sechima in Akan means menstruation. And we have the term Abra, the coming into this world, the state of existence or life in this world, manner of life. But then you get down to the third definition, the nature, the menses or monthly courses of women. We're talking about to menstruate and so forth. So we have two terms for menstruation in Akan. Obra, it talks about life because of course that blood carries the life in it, the ovulatory blood, but it's also the term for menstruation. Now, if someone is, the egg is fertilized and they don't have a menstrual cycle after that for a number of months because they're, pregnant and so forth, that means that a spirit has entered into the ovum and it's going to develop over the next 40 weeks and born as a child into the world. But if the ovum is not fertilized, that ovum, and there are hundreds of thousands of ova within the womb of the woman, they are still connected to the matriclan ancestresses. So when that ovum passes through and is released during the menstrual cycle, very often it will carry an ancestral spirit, bring it into the domicile of the person, and it becomes a protective ancestral spirit in the domicile of the person. So a woman passing over 400 ova over the course of her, fertility period from the time she reaches puberty until the onset of, the end of menstruation and so forth, then she's typically about 400 cycles and so forth that has taken place. Many of those eggs that come through bring an ancestral spirit from the matriclan side into the sphere of activity of the person, and that becomes a protective spirit within the home. So this is why women who have gone beyond the menstrual, period and so forth, older women are considered, on a positive sense, they're considered very powerful because they can wield influence over these spirits that they've birthed into the world. On the negative side, they'll try to call them obayifo or witches and so forth. And some people, if they're unscrupulous, they'll work with wayward, spiritually uncultivated spirits and so forth that they've brought into the world and so forth to do things. And make people sick, or, make people have car crashes, or make people have miscarriages, or make people have problems in finances, or make people have problems with relationships and so forth. But if they're grounded, individuals, they only work with grounded, spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, and they will influence over them. So they have an army of spirits that they've brought into the domicile and so forth. And this is why they'll say the older women have that kind of power. So Obra, though, means the menses, but Sechima also means the menses, menstruation. So when we say the name of the divinity, Abena, becomes Abena, Abra, and so forth, the root Obra, menses, but she's also called Sechima in Akan, Sechima, meaning menstruation. And then when we look at this, in Akan culture, girls who reach puberty and have their first menstrual cycle are taken through womanhood training. This form of rites of passage is called Bra Goro. Goro means a celebration of the Obra, the menses. As the girls are going through the Bra Goro initiation, they are called either Obra Ni, meaning to be Ni Obra, they're in the Obra state, or they're called Sechima, because they're in the Sechima state. The term Obra, as we said, Obra Ni means to be Ni of the Obra, the menses state, conditioner class. And Sechima means the same thing. But the key is Sechima in Akan is also the name Sechimat or Sechimet or Sekhmet in ancient Khmer. So you'll find that every girl in Akan culture, when she goes through menstruation and has her first cycle, is taken into womanhood training, and that starts on a Abinada Tuesday and so forth. She's called Sechima. Every little girl is called Sekhmet while she's in that process. Also called Obrani, which is Abina Ni, which is a title also of Sekhmet in ancient Khmer. When you look at the title of the female divinity, a city goddess of Edfu, here it's written Behudet, but it's also Behdat and Bedat and Bedad. So Bedad came Benna and Abenna and so forth, that the city goddess of Edfu. There's the male divinity Benna, Heru Bedat or Heru Bedet, Herakuti and so forth. But then you also have the female divinity Bedat, which is Abena. Bedat became Abena, Abena, and that's what it is. So every girl is called Abra, which is Abena, or she's called Sechima, that is Bedat from ancient Khmer, the city goddess of Edfu, and also Sechimet or Sekhmet and so forth. So we continued the same tradition. All right, so we want to go back real quick to okay, so this is why, the reason why this cosmology is important with regard to ritual, because when people are engaged in ritual and talking about sexuality and so forth, what are you actually engaged in? When the man and woman come together, they're drawn together, Afrakani people only, of course, by Afia, which is Het Heru. In the Akan tradition, she's also called Cheche in Akan, which is Het Hair. We're drawn together, we're pulled together in a harmonious fusion, harmonious balance by that force in creation, Het Heru. That fusion, that initiatory fusion that's brought together is perpetuated through the female divinity Bast, which we're going to check out in a second. But when we're drawn together like that and we're operating its two halves of the divine whole, when we engage the ritual process, and that is inclusive of what Akan people call Ka, Bomu, or copulation and so forth, then you're not just a male and a female exchanging, fluids or exchanging energy. You have a matriclan divinity and a busia bosom. You're connected to a female divinity whose energy you carry. The male is connected to a patriclan divinity and edja bosom whose energy you carry. And then you wield that energy when you're engaged, not only, in copulation with the person who's your spouse, your mate, your divine complement, and so forth, but that kind of energy is also utilized to power the various things that you're engaged in. Your function in the world, your pursuits, your career, and so forth, what you're engaged in. That energy is what powers you and guides you and informs the way you view the world and operate in the world. Now, so when people understand that, they begin to utilize that energy, they invoke that energy when they're engaged in any form of ritual, inclusive of coupling, inclusive of ritual practice, inclusive of copulating with the spouse, generating all that kind of energy. You don't want to generate all that kind of, sexual energy only to disperse it in a self-destructive way or a useless way. And if you're engaged in self-destructive behavior, then the abosom that are connected to you, patriclan and matriclan, will withdraw from you. And now you're just operating on lower level electromagnetic energy. So we just want to pull this portion out right here. Okay, so we did this article a while back. And we're talking about the female divinity, Bast, cat divinity. And of course, she exists in the various traditions under the, within the names of their cultures and so forth. Let me have the, So when you look at the heart itself and you look at the pericardium that surrounds the heart, that's the fluid-filled sac that surrounds the heart, and it stabilizes the heart and facilitates, it lubricates the heart and so forth, facilitates heart's function. It's a fluid-filled sac surrounding the heart. Now we talked about the female divinity, Bast, and you look at her sacred, symbol, and it's the Njuan jar. And that jar, that oil jar, perfume jar, but oil jar, makes up her name, Bes, or Bast, and so forth. And this is the symbol for the tea, and this is the seed of divinity. It's called Besin in Akan, just so you can see that. So you see Bes, Njuan vase, oil bottle, the oil bottle used in the ceremony of opening the mouth, Besti, salve, Njuan, and so forth. In the tree language of the Akan, Besin, the palm oil pot, and so forth. And that's also the name of the divinity, Besin. So that Besin in Akan is best or best, and so forth in ancient Kemet. But so we're showing that she governs the pericardium. That is her shrine in the body. So when people are talking about, for example, using the hoodoo tradition, and they're going to use some hoodoo and put some roots on somebody to make somebody fall in love with somebody, or keep a man, or keep a woman, or attract somebody, and so forth. When people are talking like that, and they're talking that's part of HOODOO sexuality, but they don't have any consciousness of the cosmology, they're not dealing with hoodoo. They're not dealing with actual divinities. They're not dealing with the patriclan divinity that governs the man, or the matriclan divinity that governs the woman. If they were, they would seek to find out what is the function, or assist the individual of recognizing what their function in the world is in relationship to the deity that governs them. And then they should engage in behaviors that's reflective of their divine function in harmony with the deity that governs them, whether it's the male or the female. And when they do that, then they will attract the kind of individual that they need to be involved with, as opposed to just seeing somebody they're attracted to and trying to make somebody, put a root on somebody or make some medicine to make somebody, be attracted to them or lust after them. Now, the cosmology of that is, it has to do with the pericardium. Now, we said the abosom deity Bast, often shown in her totemic form as the divine Mau or cat, works with Heteru Afi, while the sensual attraction, which facilitates the fusion of complementary opposites, is the initiatory process of a relationship that's governed by Heteru. When we're attracted to one another, complementary balance and so forth, electromagnetism and so forth, we're drawn together. Heteru facilitates that magnetism to pull us together. If we live in different cities and so forth, and you get pushed and prodded to take a job in a different city, and pushed and prodded when you move to the city to live in a certain area, pushed and prodded to go to a store at a certain day at a certain time and walk down a certain aisle and so forth, and you're pushed and maneuvered to cross paths with a certain person. Heteru is facilitating that process. And the Imsamanfo are, participating by guiding you through that process. So you end up, she facilitates that process, you connect and so forth. That's the initiatory fusion, the sensual attraction, which facilitates the fusion of complementary opposites. She does that. Now, that's the initiatory process, but then the perpetuation, once the fusion happens, you need to stay together. You don't just fuse together, meet, and then never see each other again. You perpetuate that. Just like a sperm and ovum unite, fuse together, there's a zygote, but it has to stay together. The sperm doesn't leave, a few days later, then the zygote falls apart. It has to stay together so it can, the cell division can happen and the embryo begins to grow. When the relationship fuses together first, then it needs to be perpetuated. Heteru governs the fusion and the replenishment of that balance. And when they talk about, people talk about, bringing spice back into the relationship or remembering what brought you together and so forth, dealing with, Heteru has to do with that. But the perpetuation of that fusion, so there's growth and development through affection, is governed by Bast. So Heteru governs the attraction that leads to that fusion and so forth, but the perpetuation of that, fusion through affection is governed by Bast. The sacred vessel of Bast, holding the unguents and so forth, for healing and preservation, has its base in the heart, which is a repository for the balanced energy, which will be expressed through emotional affection. And we say it is Bast through her agency and function of affection who establishes fidelity in relationships. Fidelity is the revelation of divine affection. So fidelity has to do with the perpetuation of the fusion. Heteru is going to bring you together. If you forget certain things or you fall off track and so forth, she'll remind you of that fusion, or she'll stimulate that original, attraction and so forth. But the perpetuation of that through development and so forth, that has to do with Bast. So now let's look at one piece right here. Okay, so when we talk about the pericardium and its function, there's a function of Heteru in the heart as well, and that has to do with that fusion. Drawn together, you feel something in your heart and so forth. And when they talk about there's a brain here, there's a brain in the gut, and there's also a brain in the heart and so forth, that has to do with Heteru. That's something that they've discovered recently. There are neural, cells and pathways in the heart that reflect what's happening in the brain. Just like you have the gut, that they will call the third brain and so forth. But we've always understood that that's why they associate Heteru with the heart as well, Heru and Heteru. But then the fluid-filled sac around the heart stabilizes the heart, lubricates the heart, and allows things to continue. It has to do with perpetuation. That fluid-filled sac is the oil jar that perpetuates, that's governed by Bast. Now, we often hear in the hoodoo tradition, they talk about the evil eye, or somebody's looking somebody in the eye and they're trying to put them, send some spirits towards them or control them, or, project some energy to assist them and so forth. What is that all about? Bast is referenced as the Arit Ra, or the Eye of Ra. In our cosmology, Ra is the creator of the universe. Ra is the creatress of the universe. The right eye of Ra is the sun, the Aten. The left eye of Ra is the Yat, or the moon. Now, Bast, in her totemic form of the divine cat, she's called Arit Ra, the eye of Ra, specifically the Arit Abet, or the left eye of Ra, which is the moon. When she's in the form of a lioness, she's the Arit Amet, or the right eye of Ra, which is the sun. So we actually are just coming, completing a full moon last night and tonight and so forth. This is that eye, left eye of Ra and so forth. And when she's in her totemic form as the cat, she governs that moon. In the coffin text of the Middle Empire of Kemet, it's conveyed that Bast is the firstborn daughter of Atem. She's our protection until the day dawns. Atem operates through the setting sun. He governs the completion of the day and shift from the day cycle to the night cycle, which in turn inaugurates the dominance of the moon. The Arid Abed, or the left eye of Ra, this is the ancient link of Bast to the Yat, or the moon. When we look at the waxing and the waning of the moon and so forth, if you look at the moon cycles and the waxing and the waning, and you look at the imagery of that, you will also see, of course, that we recognize that imagery of that also reflects the image of the eyes of the cat, waxing and waning and so forth. So it visually reflects the eyes of the cat. Moreover, the magnetic force of the moon allows the perpetuation of the solar energy and light, even through the darkness. So when we're trying to navigate our way through darkness, we invoke the divinity that animates the moon and so forth. So just like physically, the moon sheds light so we can navigate our way through the darkness, so we don't injure ourselves or get attacked and so forth by negative entities, individuals, animals and so forth, wild animals and so forth. The light of the moon perpetuates the light of the sun, even when we're in darkness. And spiritually, when we're in spiritual darkness, we invoke the divinity that can illumine our path, even though we're in the darkness. Now, and that's what we say there. Yet the gravitational pull of the moon also affects the expansion or rising of the tides on Earth, as well as the rising of the tides within our bodies. When they talk about a full moon and you look at the statistics of people, robberies and, other, strange happenings and so forth, directly related to the gravitational pull of the moon affecting the Earth, causing the tides to rise, causing the tides in our bodies to rise, meaning we retain more water, meaning we're not burning as much. The heat in the body is not, burning up or creating as much quote unquote steam. We're holding on to more water. We're more cool. So our water levels rise and we're more receptive and, can go into the spirit realm easier. We say coolness lends itself to the measure of contemplation necessary to make proper assessments, resolve conflict, and reach balanced resolutions. You're more receptive and intuitive, but if you're not grounded, you fall into depression, or you fall into an abyss of being, not having, firm footing and so forth, and not knowing where to go, like in suspended animation and so forth, like somebody diving in an ocean and can't move about and so forth. So this is why we must be grounded. But We say the term Rao in the language of Kemet means to grow, expand, flourish, and prosper, succeed, and to be sound. The same term is vocalized as Ara and Akan, with the same meaning to expand, multiply, bring forth abundantly, grow, fill, and so forth. It's spelled here, root, but in the Coptic dialect is Ra, Ra, to be strong, thrive, succeed, to prosper, grow, be sound, and flourish. Ra. In Akan, that's Ara, Ada, or Ara, to increase in number, multiply, be numerous, produce, attract, gather, and all of that. But then Ada, Ara, also means love or affection. So when we're talking about affection, connecting with the person who's the balance, male or female and so forth, aligning with their energy and so forth, so we can succeed, prosper, thrive, be strong, flourish, be sound, to grow and so forth through Ara, affection, that becomes Ada or adore, meaning adoration in English. That goes back to Ara or Arat in ancient Kemet. That's where they took that from. That perpetuation grows, expands, flourishes, brings forth abundantly. That is the domain of the divinity Bast. We have these sacred symbols and totems of cats and so forth in the Hoodoo tradition that goes back to this notion of this female divinity, animal totem connected to the expansion, growth, development, flourishing, because she governs the pericardium, the heart, and so forth. This is where that comes from. When people talk about pouring down the moon in the Hoodoo tradition, it's directly related to Bast. Now, so when we say the physiological shrine of Bast is the Unjuin jar, the oil jar, she's the left eye of Ra. When we experience the divine energy of Bast in this region, in the pericardium region, you feel something swelling around the heart and so forth. If you see left eye governed by Bast, also the pericardium governed by Bast, so there's a link between the eye and the heart. You see the individual who's the divine complement through the left eye Bast, the eye that's governed by Bast, and then it affects her shrine in this part, the lower part of the body, the trunk of the body, the pericardium, and you feel the sensation around the heart. This is why we say when our physical and spiritual side is fixated upon our divine complement, our hearts begin to swell, become full, expand. That's Ra or Ara, expansion, flourish, grow, sound, and all that. That's the direct link between the eye, the sight, and the heart pericardium complex. When the Arit Abet, the left eye, Bast as the eye of the moon is invoked, the sacred shrine of Bast surrounding our heart is invoked, her energy of Ara, affection, thus manifests itself, and then it establishes fidelity, the divine perpetuation of harmonious fusion. So when you invoke Bast, you're invoking that force that perpetuates the fusion that Het Heru established. Het Heru brought you together. Bast will keep you together when you invoke that divinity. That affection manifests as fidelity. If people are not invoking this divinity, then, consciously or subconsciously, then this is how fidelity falls apart. When we talk about fidelity in relationships, in reality, it's not difficult to maintain fidelity. In white culture, they'll say, well, I'm just being human. If I cheat, I'm just being human. In our culture, it's not hard at all. It's more difficult to cheat on somebody. It takes more energy and, focus to, sneak around and do all that kinds of nonsense and cheat and hide and lie about different things. It's much easier to not do any of that. And when you're engaged in just a base level of discipline, you have a base level of discipline and you embrace your culture, it's not difficult to not cheat at all. You can be in a relationship or a marriage for years and not cheat. If it doesn't work out, then you just leave and connect with somebody who, who you need to connect with. It's not difficult at all. And people who are engaged in culture, it's very simple. You're with an individual. If it doesn't work out, you leave the individual. If it does work out and you have issues, then you engage the ritual process to, bring balance. If both people are not focused in that manner, then it's going to create discordance and it's not going to work out. So we say, while this reality has been a central component of our lived experience and so forth, it's only recently that Westerners have discovered a biological basis for this dynamic. It's been documented that those in a relationship, simply by staring at one another, can cause their heartbeats to synchronize with one another. There's a direct connection between the functions of the eye and the heart for bonding and perpetuating bonding. And of course, we show a link to one of these articles in National Geographic. The discovery that people's hearts can harmonize solely on visual or auditory information reinforces a law of nature, according to Michael Richardson, a psychologist at the University of Cincinnati. The natural law of coupled oscillators holds that when two or more rhythms meet, they will become coordinated, a phenomenon seen across the natural world, from fireflies matching their flashes to groups falling into step and so forth. So we have a cosmological basis for that. It's important to note that Bast is the one that perpetuates that fusion. But beyond that, we need to understand that before any of that takes place, when we talk about the mojo and the jack, it's specifically the blood bag and the white fluid bag and so forth that's directly connected to the matriclan and patriclan. These two can't be separate. If someone's talking about hoodoo and they say, I have a jack ball or I have a mojo hand and so forth, if they don't know that one is matriclan and one is patriclan, they don't know that they are two halves of a whole. They work in concert with one another. The matriclan and patriclan divinities work in concert with one another. So, and you also find, just as an aside also, the mojo bag is also called a mojo hand. One of the terms for the ja packet, as you can see here, is called sana. Sana, the root in sa means hand, so it's a hand packet. That's why we call it a hand and so forth. The jack ball is also called a hand. When you look at the mojo, they'll call it a mojo bag or a mojo hand and so forth. But they also call it a toby. Now, why would they call it a toby hand? We said the blood is the ovulatory blood. It's the ovulatory blood that has to do with menstruation. The female divinity of menstruation is Sechima or Sekhmet. She's called Sechima in Akan. She's called Abra in Akan. Abra, or Abina, is also Obra, which is the menses. So the female divinity that governs the ovulatory blood that deals with that mojo bag, that bag for protection. Of course, Sekhmet is the warrioress and so forth. She protects, defends, and so forth, but she's also a healer. Her priests are called Sunu, meaning physicians. So let's look at that real quick. Okay, so we're showing different things, and we're showing her blood and the bones and all of that. Scroll up real quick. So you'll see that she's the feminine aspect of the fire at the innermost core of the earth and so forth, the innermost core of the sun, the innermost core, she's called Neset, which is the lady of flame and so forth, lady of fire. And that fire is that red fire, not just of the planet Benar, Abinar, Mars and so forth, but deep within the core. Now, so she spills blood through warfare, but she also spills blood through menstruation. Her priests are called Sunu, and the term Sunu means physician. So she's a divine killer, but also a divine healeress. And the class of priests that assist her are the Sunu, are the physicians. Now, if we look back at this divinity, Sechima Sekhmet, and she's governed as the Benada or Abenada, which is Tuesday. In the Akan tradition, governs the lymphatic system. So when we talk about the 7 days of the week, the Akradim Bosom, the deities that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week in Akan culture, and we're named after them. So when you look at the names, the day of the week, Akwesida or Wusida Sunday, the Abosom is Awusi and Esi. For females, it's Akoswia and Kwesi. So I'm born on a Wusida Sunday. I'm Kwa Asi, or a servant Kwa of the deity Asi, which is Awusi, which is Alsar. Someone born on Joda. Ajua is the female divinity. So if you're born on Joda, which is Monday, you're female, you're Ajua. That is the title of all Set, who operates through the moon in that context. If you're born on Tuesday, Benada or Abenada. If you're a woman, you're Abena. If you're a male, the male divinity is Bena, you're called Kwa, Bena, and so forth. But there are also praise names for these different days. Kwesi, the soul name for someone born on that day. Obwe opener of the path. Bodria, the animal's tail or the whisk, means a sovereign or a born leader. So that's a praise name for someone born under that divinity. If you have born on the day of the moon and so forth, and you're a woman, Okotowa. Okoto means crab. That's a sacred animal totem, the Okoto. And Okotowa is one who's a child of that, sacred animal totem, supplicant, conciliatory, one who, she knows how to negotiate, balance, compromise, mother, a stern mother, protective mother, but also a nurturing mother, and brings balance, negotiates the needs of the individual with the needs of the group and so forth. So our praise name can be Okotowa, an Ajawa, one born of the moon and so forth. Then you look at Tuesday, Benata. For a male, Kwa Bena or Kobena, also Kobe and so forth. Ojam, a praise name. Jam means fire within. Ja means fire, Mu within. So Jamu means fire within. Ojam, passionate, compassionate, fire within. For a woman, it's the feminine version is Jama. So Jam for males, Jama for females, passionate, compassionate, fire within. Of course, that is Sekhmet, the fire within and all that. But then the other praise name is Atobia, Atobia, and that the root is Tobi, and then the feminine suffix is Atobia. So that's Tobi is a praise name of a Tuesday born, a praise name of Sekhmet, Atobi. And Sekhmet, of course, is the one that spills blood through warfare, it spills blood through menstruation. The reason why the red blood bag is called a mojo bag, it's a moja bag, it's a blood bag. It's the endometrium. It's the lining of the uterus that's shed through menstruation through Sekhmet. Sekhmet is called Atobia. The root is Tobi. This is why it's called a mojo hand, but it's also called a Tobi hand. It's a title of the goddess of menstruation. Now you'll have some fools because they repeated what Robert Ferris Thompson said in Flash of the Spirit, talking about the term mojo comes from the term moyo in the Congo and so forth, and Tobi is a Congo word and so forth, and that's the reason why these talismans are called that, and it has to do with, some of them will talk about it has to do with, Islamic practices, and the little, satchels are gree bags, and they have to do with Islamic practices. pure foolishness. Mojo and Toby comes from mogya and atobia, and these have to do with titles of the function of the deity that governs menstruation, and this is why it's a blood bag. All of that cosmology is tied up into the mogya, as well as the related cosmology to the eja, which has to do with matriclan and patriclan energy. When you understand that and you incorporate the energy that you inherited within yourself from your mother, your father, and so forth, and the deity that governs your patriclan and matriclan, then you can start talking about sexuality. You can understand the specific energy complex that you inherited, invoke that patriclan divinity and matriclan divinity to strengthen that energy that's unique to you, and then connect with the person that you're, designed to be with, and they're doing the same thing. If you don't have that understanding, then you're not really engaged. People talking about hoodoo and sexuality and so forth, and making little roots and bags to attract. Imagine people not knowing what's going on, and they're saying, hey, you want a mojo bag? Come to my website, $40, I'll make you a mojo bag, and I'll put some roots and herbs in there, and you'll be able to attract the man you want and keep the man you want. No knowledge of the divinity, the patriclan divinity or matriclan divinity, no knowledge of anything that we just talked about. Just, I'm gonna put a few little roots in here. I'm gonna read some little Bible verses like the Psalms over, which is ridiculous because that's pure nonsense, has no basis in reality. And then I'm gonna charge you $40 for a mojo bag. This is what people are doing. So, okay. So that's what we wanted to cover tonight. I just wanted to go through that to give a totally different and, grounded understanding of what, masculine and feminine energy actually represents through the mogya and the eja, the mojo and the jack. So, but there are many more details we're going to get into at our Hoodoo Mind Festival this Saturday in Atlanta. So we still have tickets available. We're going to have vendors, we'll have presentations, a number of different things happening at the festival. So you can go to our website. Right now, you will see the Hoodoo Mind flyer. You'll see the registration information. You can pay right there. But this is what's happening this Saturday in Atlanta, October 15th. As you see on the website, a vegan lunch is included with the registration fee. So registration is $20, full course of vegan lunch. You can also, of course, download, right now you can download these 4 books on our website. This is all on the flyer and so forth, dealing with different aspects of the hoodoo tradition. So you get access to this information. You can download these 4 books, plus you get a vegan meal and so forth. So, but that is Saturday. Now, for individuals who, if you're new to some of the information that we're dealing with, couple of announcements. Okay, let me know if that we answered the question about the affection in the chat room. So we will be going back once again to Kemet, taking another group to Kemet in May, our tour to Kemet and Khanit, Egypt and Nubia and so forth, Kemet and Khanit. From south to north, we visit 12 different cities during this tour and so forth. So all of the information is there. If you would like to get in on the tour, we still have a few spaces left available. You can make a deposit, and we have monthly payment plans. You can pay monthly from now all the way through the beginning of May and so forth. Okay, yes. So all of that information is on the Audicast site. These 13 videos that we publish are from the tour, this recent tour and so forth. The vast majority is from the recent tour. We have some footage from the previous trip to Kemet from the year before, but this recent trip in May that we just came back from a few months ago, those 13 videos, you'll be able to see the different things that you will be experiencing, different cities that we travel to, tombs, temples, shrine spaces, and so forth. You'll see all of that in the videos. So that's coming up.